debate on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly and the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and Cox Communications. From a $4 billion deficit last year to a $400 million surplus this year, you'd think it would be a lot easier for members of the General Assembly to balance the budget. However, given the competing demands of education, public safety, transportation, and health, the members face significant challenges as they enter the second full week of this very short legislative session. In addition, issues surrounding the redrawing of state legislative districts and congressional boundaries will be taken up in a special session later this year, a politically challenging process that will determine the political course of the Commonwealth for the next 10 years. Here to discuss some of these issues and others with us today is Senator Chap Petersen from Northern Virginia. Welcome, sir.
Woody, thank you for having me. Thanks for having me on.
Tell us a little bit about your district, your constituency, and what's happening back home.
Sure. I represent about 200,000 people currently. My district is basically the middle of Fairfax County. It's sort of around the hub of Fairfax City, but also going north of 66 to take in the town of Vienna, and then all the way up to Wolf Trap Farm Park up by Route 7, and then all the way down to Lake Braddock in the south. So it's basically the middle of Fairfax County. I like to call it God's country. Not everybody calls it that, but it's a great place to live.
And what kind of committee assignments do you currently hold here in Richmond?
Right now I'm on the Courts of Justice Committee, and then also Agricultural and Natural Resources, Privileges and Elections, and General Laws and Technology.
Keeps you pretty busy.
I'm very busy.
And of course, this is the short session, and I know you guys work from sun up to sundown. What's a day in the life, a typical one, if there is such an animal for you?
Well, that's a great question, and it's very busy. I get up early in the morning. I try and exercise every day. For example, this morning I went for a run down Monument Avenue at about 6 in the morning.
And it's raining this morning.
And it was raining this morning, so it was cold and rainy. But I get into my office about 7:30 in the morning. I try and read the Richmond Times-Dispatch and the Washington Post just to see what's going on, check my emails, and then my committee meetings usually begin around 9, and that will take us through the morning, and then our caucus meets at 11:30, and then we go into session at noon. Then I'll typically have more committee meetings in the afternoon, and then usually after about 5 p.m. I spend about 1 or 2 hours just answering emails, talking to constituents on the phone, and then 7 p.m. I try and go out and find a place to eat, and then about 8:30 I go home and hit the sack.
Doesn't give you much time for the introduction of legislation, but I know you have some matters of interest you are pursuing this session.
Absolutely. I have 26 bills that I filed. I'm happy to talk about all of them. I think probably the ones that are getting the most attention are the 3 bills I filed on foreclosure reform to stop what I call drive-by foreclosures, particularly in Northern Virginia where I live, try and just reform that whole industry. And, you know, right now I feel like Northern Virginia, we're at the epicenter of what is a foreclosure epidemic in the United States, and we need some better protections for our homeowners. We need to regulate some of the lenders and creditors and what they're doing, and just bring some transparency to this process. So that's kind of my most important set of bills. I also have some bills on government efficiency and energy efficiency. I have a bill that would mandate that the state would go to green buildings for all of its new buildings over 5,000 square feet. I'm very happy to say that the Governor McDonald is going to support this bill, and hopefully we'll get it through committee this afternoon, and that will become the law in the Commonwealth. I also have a number of bills dealing with transportation, trying to look at ways that we can raise more revenue for transportation, look at ways that we can become more efficient in how we spend state money. And then finally, I have a set of bills that I'm bringing for the Commissioners of Revenue, but again, I think they help government efficiency and also small businesses. One would take the DMV Select program that we have in Fairfax City, where you can go to City Hall and meet with the Commissioner of Revenue and have a DMV transaction handled right there on site, and would expand that to basically every city and county in Virginia. And another one that I'm very proud of called One Stop, which if you're a small business like myself, you can come in and meet with your Commissioner of Revenue and both register for a business license and also register for reporting sales tax at the same time. So you're not running all over Fairfax County filling out forms when you try and start a business. So those are some of the bills I'm carrying.
Well, that's quite a lineup. And let's focus back on the mortgage foreclosure crisis, because that's affecting a lot of people. It's been in the news lately. What's the current process, and how much notice do homeowners have, and are the courts involved?
Okay, well, let's talk about the current process, which is extremely chaotic, and it leads to what I call drive-by foreclosures. right now there's only 14 days notice required from the creditor to the homeowner before a foreclosure occurs. So if you're late on a note, or you're late on a payment, or somehow you've defaulted on your mortgage, you can literally be foreclosed on within 14 days under the law as it is right now. Now, what makes this process even more confusing is basically the people that own the mortgage are very rarely the people that sold you the house or actually financed the original mortgage. What's happened in the last few years is there's been a secondary mortgage market where that mortgage has been bought and sold sometimes dozens of times, oftentimes on Wall Street, and so the person that actually owns your mortgage is no longer linked to the community. They may have no relationship with you. They may have no knowledge about your community. And if you're in a position where you're trying to, for example, pay off a balance or get current on your mortgage, it can be very confusing and very complicated to try and find out who actually owns the mortgage.
So these are these securities that were created some time ago.
What they call mortgage-backed securities. And ironically, the mortgage-backed security industry created a lot of wealth on Wall Street about 5 years ago, and then, of course, it almost destroyed the country 2 years ago when it led to the Wall Street collapse and Lehman Brothers and a lot of the banks that went down, because as the mortgage industry collapsed and the real estate industry collapsed, a lot of these big banks, of course, were holding these securities, and a lot of them basically went into default. And now we're dealing with the wreckage of the system where you have homeowners in Northern Virginia, some of whom have lost their jobs or fallen behind in a payment, and these are people that want to get current. They're trying to either work out a loan modification, or maybe they borrowed some money from a parent or a sibling and they're trying to get current. But again, there's no notice requirement as to who actually owns the mortgage, so they're almost in an impossible position to get current on their mortgage. And again, with only 14 days, they just don't have time, and so you have what I call drive-by foreclosures, where basically the papers are filed, the foreclosure occurs, and sometimes the homeowner finds out that they've been foreclosed on after it's already happened. And my goal is to just slow the process down, give better notice to homeowners, and also require the recordation of the mortgage when it's bought and sold at the county courthouse. So you can go online, look up your property on the county land records and see who owns your mortgage, and then you have the ability to then go back and make a deal with that person, pay off the balance, whatever it takes, so you can stay in your home.
Are those documents recorded anywhere at this point in time?
Well, right now there's a system called MERS, and I forget what it stands for, but basically it's a banking sort of repository of information where banks can go and basically register their information voluntarily. It's not government owned, it's not government authenticated, and there's been a lot of questions as to how accurate that information is. Folks up my way have probably read a lot of stories about what they call robo-signers, who are people that basically went back afterwards and filled out fraudulently documents that said that we had taken title to a certain mortgage or taken title to a promissory note, and they didn't. They just filled out the document just so they could have a paper trail to show they owned the mortgage. And that's another one of my bills would make it a penalty to fraudulently fabricate a document or use a document that's fabricated to procure a foreclosure. So right now, Woody, we don't have a system in place. You know, one of the reasons why we have county courthouses is so we have an institution where record keeping can be centralized and authenticated. So again, my goal is to make sure that this information is kept in the courthouse. And incidentally, our county clerks, of course, can charge a small fee for the filing, which helps them with their revenues. And also, again, I look at Wall Street, they made a ton of money off our homeowners and off of our loans. And we didn't see a nickel of it. And it seems to me at a de minimis amount that they could at least pay for the filing and the recording of these mortgages.
Great, great. Well, let's turn our attention to some of your green building initiatives.
Yes, sir. Green buildings is a bill I brought for 4 straight years. Honestly, it originally started as an environmental proposal, and there still are environmental benefits to it. But as it's kind of gone through various iterations, I think it's become more of almost a government cost savings bill, that when you take buildings, new buildings, and you build them according to green principles, LEED certified principles, Green Globe principles, you're saving money for the taxpayer. You're using more natural light, you're reusing water, and basically by virtue of doing this, you're lowering the utility costs for these buildings. And so the point is, it's going to save taxpayer money. 2 years ago, when I was head of the Energy Efficiency Subcommittee, we looked at green buildings, and the figures that we had showed that the construction cost was typically 1% to 3% more to use green certified principles, because you're reusing materials, you're using more natural light, you're using more windows. But that was almost immediately amortized in utility cost savings. So my position has been, and I'm glad the governor agrees with me, is that by requiring us to follow green building principles, we're going to save taxpayer money